Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Melissa Johansson, Content Director at DMG Events, and welcome to the Global Energy Show online series. The Global Energy Show was set to host 53,000 people from more than 100 countries this June here in Calgary. Unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 situation, we've had to postpone the event until June 2021. But at DMG Events and the Global Energy Show, we're committed to working alongside the sector as the key platform to host pivotal conversations for the industry now and well into the future. So in the meantime, while we eagerly anticipate the next Global Energy Show, our webinar series will be showcasing strategic panel discussions, interviews with industry leaders, and presentations on technological advancements, not only from Canada, but from around the world. Today, we're pleased to bring you a very timely discussion about the financial support that has recently become available for Canada's oil and gas industry during these unprecedented times. But before we get started, a few housekeeping items. If you'd like to ask a question, please type it at the bottom of the Q&A, and we'll get to those questions if there's time at the end of the session. You can also upvote a question. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available afterwards on globalenergyshow.com. And finally, we'll be sending you a quick survey at the end of the event, and we look forward to your feedback. So let's get started. We have 4 people joining us today for our discussion. Duncan Au, President, CEO, and Director of CWC Energy Services. Ryan Lang, Managing Director, Deloitte Corporate Finance, Inc. Jeff Tonkin, President, CEO, and Chairman of the Board from Birchcliff Energy. And David Yeager, author and writer, energy policy analyst, and oil service executive advisory. So at this point, I will hand it over to you, David, who will moderate our session. David, over to you.
Thanks, Melissa. These are extraordinary times, creating extraordinary challenges. Fortunately, we're joined by 3 extraordinary individuals with significant expertise in all aspects of oil and gas upstream finance. What we're going to do is review the financing and capital options that have been made available in the past month to help Canada's oil patch get through these challenging and difficult times. The kindest description of our current economic situation is dynamic. It changes daily, if not hourly. But here's what we know this afternoon. There'll be 2 parts. The first is an overview with particular focus on the financial needs of the industry and communications between the business and governments on the type of assistance Canada's large, diverse, and essential oil and gas industry needs to sustain its capacity and infrastructure through these challenging times. The second part will be a review of the specific programs that have been announced, who they were intended to assist, and how managers and companies can turn government announcements into actual financial support. So I'm going to start with various sectors in the industry. I'm going to start, Duncan. You're the president and CEO of CWC Energy Services, supplier of wellbore construction and servicing equipment, including drilling and service rigs. Duncan's on the board of directors of the Petroleum Services Association of Canada and the Canadian Association of Oil Well Drilling Contractors. He was a recent chairman of Petroleum Services, was actively involved in public and government advocacy for Canada's upstream oil and gas and massive service sector. Duncan, I'm sure the oil price collapsed over 5 years ago. When it collapsed, I thought you'd seen it all. Now the industry's redefined the bottom of the historic investment cycle. From your perspective for the service side, what are the biggest challenges facing the industry? And do you believe we're worse off than our customers? What's the lay of the land, buddy?
Yeah, thanks, David. So one of the largest challenges I think facing our industry right now is really the people aspects. We have done so much damage over the last 5-6 years in terms of letting people go from this industry that the skilled labor force has really shunned away. Prior to this COVID-19 in January and February on the service rig side, even on the drilling rig side of our business, we were finding it extremely difficult to staff up our rigs over the winter season, which is really where we make hay in terms of the people coming back to the industry. And you know, as mid-March came around and we were forced into self-isolation and social distancing, we've really found that we had to let a lot of these people go. And my biggest worry has always been that we are doing extreme damage for the medium and longer term in our industry going forward. The second question you asked, David, was do we believe that the service sector is worse off than our customers? I would say yes. You know, even as oil prices decline, there is a monthly check coming into the E&P companies every month on the 25th. And while it's not as big as what once was when you're at $20 oil, our side is hit a lot harder. And I'll give you a percentage as to what that actually meant. In our company in February, we are doing what we should be doing in making revenues during that time. In April, even though we have spring breakup, I am down 94% in revenues. And so when you say we hit hard, we don't collect revenues unless we're actually working. So if there's no activity out there, we don't make revenue, and so that's led to cost cutting and much more difficult decisions in our company.
Well, that's the old saying, is that when an oil company gets a cold, the service sector gets pneumonia. You've spent many years on behalf of the service sector doing advocacy with the government. Do they get it? Do they understand what it means to the working oil patch? The focus is always on oil and oil producers and oil sands. But do they really understand what it really means for the people that do the work in the field in the service sector?
Yeah, David, I've spent a lot of time with government relations over the last 3 years, more than I thought I'd ever have to do in my as president and CEO of an oilfield services company, for sure. I would suggest that the governments of Alberta and Saskatchewan fully get it, and they are fully supportive of this sector and the energy sector, and willing to go out and advocate on our behalf. With the federal government, it's a little bit of a different story. Some of the initiatives, the programs that you're seeing that we'll talk about a little later here today, the site rehabilitation program, I think a lot of people think that was something that was just brought up over the last 6-7 weeks in terms of helping our industry. It really wasn't. It was 3 years ago that we started down the road of going, we have an inactive well issue in the Western Canadian Basin, and we think that there needs to be some incentives as to getting producers to get on with cleaning up those wells. And so as part of PSAC, we did go to Ottawa and we pitched these ideas. It was received with a cold shoulder, I would suggest. Having said that, the concepts made a whole lot of sense. And I think it took a health pandemic and economic crisis to actually have government step up and realize that we got to help out.
Well, we got her done anyway. It's we'll get to that later. Ryan is the managing director for Western Canada for Deloitte Corporate Finance, full service accounting, tax advisory, consulting companies like yours, Ryan. They see it all, not only the oil business, but from a much broader perspective, because it includes the next layer down in the supply chain, companies in transportation, accommodation, logistics, construction, and component supply. With your diverse client base across the 4 Western oil and gas producing provinces, you've got a bigger picture view of how the oil patch downturn is affecting the greater economy. What do you see? What are your managers and your relationship with your vast of client base? What are they telling you?
Thanks, David. I think tough would be a good word for it. I think across all the provinces, I help companies raise capital throughout Western Canada, and often bringing in capital sources outside of Canada for companies. And what I would suggest is that given the more recent shocks to the oil market, but also obviously the more kind of medium term things that have occurred, I would say that most of our clients are finding it very tough. And if it's more or less about profitability than how profitable you are, and that's a hard market to be in. And I echo what Duncan has said. I've heard this from many clients. As these things unfold, the human capital piece to it is a tough one. Finding people to work, when to work, new contracts, renegotiations, underutilized assets, the selling of those assets, etc. So it's a tough one for sure.
Well, what do they need? I mean, other than the economy to return to normal, but in the short term, the way I look at it is the government's helped create this problem. I guess they're trying to help get it out. Is it effective? Do you see the sort of assistance your broad client base requires?
I would say that there is assistance. To what degree that means is pretty vast. I would say that there's a heck of a lot more assistance to other industries for sure right now than there is to the oil and gas sector, generally speaking. I think we need to do more for sure. I think sometimes people forget about how important the oil and gas sector is to the Canadian economy, and especially the Western economy. And so I do and am hopeful that more will continue to come out. I mean, obviously they have announced a few programs more recently to assist the oil and gas sector and service sector for sure, but I think that there can definitely be more, not just financing as well. As you can imagine, I'm a finance guy, and adding more debt into a company that can't pay it back is not necessarily the best way to do things. So I think more needs to be done.
Any suggestions?
Any suggestions? Yeah, that's a good question. I do think that in terms of, and I actually will look at the U.S. side of things. We're doing a lot of work in the U.S. and what I've found is that the U.S. government, for all that they've done, they have been way more forgiving in terms of providing capital and more flexible capital, and even forgiving loans to companies in the U.S. If you want to call it a loan, forgiving those if they meet certain criteria. And the Canadian government has taken a very tactical approach to the way that they want to deploy capital. And I think that speed is very important in these types of situations. And I feel that at the very least, they should be speeding things up and maybe doing it faster and looking back and trying to figure it out. It's like setting sail and building the boat at the same time. I think that we need to do that in this case.
Well, that's probably a good segue into the more technical aspect. We've got some slight technical problems with our oil company guy, but they'll figure it out. But Duncan, you're in the service rig business, and you said you worked hard through the Petroleum Services Association. The Alberta government site reclamation program were first to go. It was really only released a few days ago on May the 1st, although the program was intended to stimulate immediate activity in the area of well abandonment site reclamation. It's also meant to help bolster the balance sheets of the producers that own the wells. Can you walk us through how this program is intended to help and what you're seeing? I know you're actively involved in this program and how it's rolling out, and any suggestions on how it could be better?
Yeah, absolutely, David. So this is the federal government's announcement several weeks ago of the $1.72 billion help to the energy sector, of which $1 billion of that goes to the Alberta government and other tranches to the Saskatchewan and BC government. In addition to that, there's another $200 million that goes to the Alberta Orphan Well Association. And so, as you mentioned, David, on May the 1st, the Alberta government opened up their website to allow oilfield service providers that do remediation and reclamation type work, as well as the environmental engineering companies that write the programs to clean up the well sites. That opened up on May the 1st. And so what that program allows or does is that the oilfield service companies need to go and get a contract with the E&P company, the oil and gas company, to go and do the work on their inactive wells. So, and each contractor has the ability to apply for up to $30,000 per well site. So the program has been open now for 4 days, I guess 5 days as of yesterday. And I will say that the number of applications that have come through have really overwhelmed the government with respect to how many people want to use this program to do the work that they should be doing, which is cleaning up the well sites on a timely basis. So it's left a lifeline for us as a service company, because if you think about the $1 billion program just in Alberta, and we can talk about Saskatchewan and BC later, who, by the way, Saskatchewan should open up in about a week or so from now in terms of their own program and how they want to structure that. And BC, well, they're not quite as using it as an urgency model, so we don't know when exactly BC is going to take advantage of the federal government's grants. But what it's done for us is that we're going to be able to get through to the other side here with activity level and try and keep our workforce intact. What it does for the E&P company is that it gets the inactive wells that they have at a time when funding is extremely hard to get, and help them along the path to cleaning up the wells that we would have. And then from an environmental perspective, we are doing the job that we should be doing when these wells are no longer active, and putting it back into the same shape that it was before any activity was on the well site. So this is a great program. From our own company perspective, it lasts until December 31, 2022. So it's 2.5 years for the money and the spend for the grants. And I think we've already seen a flurry of activity. Our sales guys have been working nonstop here for the last week and a half, 2 weeks, to sign up as many companies as we can on this program.
So it's spring breakup anyway. It's May. We probably wouldn't be busy. So the point is, at some point there'll be some approval sneaking out the door, and some people will go to work here in the next few weeks, probably.
Yeah. Right now the rig count is virtually nothing. I've never seen it. I've never seen it this bad, really. I mean, we've got about 25 drilling rigs, which, frankly, from a drilling perspective, I mean, with oil prices the way they have been and nowhere to store the oil, that side has really dried up. On the service rig side, it's breakup right now, which means that the rigs aren't working that much because you can't travel on soft roads, and you have county bans and provincial bans on roads. But as we come out of this thing, we need some support to get there. And if it's not going to be working on producing wells, then we should be working on the inactive wells and using our talent and our workforce now to clean up those wells.
Well, the reality is this program is massively better than the alternative, isn't it?
Absolutely. It'll keep people around. And certainly our folks in our company are going to rely on it. And it's going to help our company for sure.
Well, this is an industry that could use a bit of good news. Ryan, you're the corporate finance specialist, and you're familiar with the lending application and approval processes of the Business Development Bank of Canada, or the BDC. BDC is a federal government agency, for those who don't know, that provide a variety of financial services to small and medium businesses, including loans, and they've been earmarked as the go-to bank for working capital and liquidity loans for upstream oil and gas working through the slump. But BC's only been one of a multitude of lenders, and so all of a sudden they're going to be the only game in town in a lot of ways. So how does that look from your side? All your clients must be looking at various elements of this program.
Yeah, that's a good question. So what I would do is, I guess I'd start off with how I think they're going to roll, or how they are rolling it out, and it's not that surprising. Is that the federal government is utilizing the bank infrastructure to provide loans. And so the idea of that is that you can go to BDC and ask and get a loan request and go that route. But the federal government realized that when you have only a few thousand people in your organization and you're having 5,000 applications a month come in, that's a difficult process. And they try to not lose money on those loans as well. So they started off with trying to say, okay, well, let's use the financial institution's infrastructure, be it the bank, and if you need money, go to your bank first, and if the bank says no, then we're going to create a program that would allow for BDC and your bank to provide you financing. Now, again, the bank actually is required to take on 20% credit risk. So the program I'm referring to is called the BCAP program, the Business Credit Availability Program, and what's happening there is both EDC, BDC, and the commercial bank would be providing financing to a company. There are other programs that have been announced since that to help the oil and gas sector, but my thought around, can BDC even handle this volume? No, I don't think so. In fact, we're hearing it all the time from all sectors. I work in other sectors as well, and it's not just the oil and gas sector that is looking obviously for financing at this point in time. And so, as you can imagine, think of all the oil and gas companies that might need financing and go to BDC, and then think of every other industry of companies that need money, and they're going to BDC as well. So it's a very challenging time for them as well.
But again, they would need some. This is something we chatted about prior to this program. Was that we realized that that's why I asked the question the way I asked it. They're certainly not ready to handle all this with their current staff. The regular banks probably easy for them to decline subordinated debt, open the BDC file. But do you believe the mechanism behind the scenes to expedite these loans? Is under development, or is it sort of like Duncan's comments on the site reclamation program? This is work in progress. It's sort of got to. I think we're okay for a month or so, but gee, we got to get some cash flow in here by July, don't we?
Yeah. So I would say it's a work in progress. It's hard to tell where will unfold, right? I mean, they have the check to write, but you have to do the process, follow the process of a credit to get the money. And so I would say that they're going to be hamstrung by the capacity that BDC has. Banks, you're right. I mean, well, for the most part, many mezz lenders are not lending right now in any sector. Some are, but to be able to get BDC, for example, to provide mezzanine financing into your company, it's a tough go right now. And I, not because of just the industry and the company and the credit and everything else, but you have to realize too that all financial institutions, including BDC, are worried about their existing loan portfolio. So they don't want to lose money in their existing loan portfolio. So not only are there new applications coming in, then there's new companies they've never dealt with, and so they're trying to get to know them. But then they're also trying to manage their existing loan portfolio and try not to lose money on that as well. So it's a heck of a lot of work for those organizations.
Well, I think we should try to spin this in a way that's somewhat less discouraging than your description of the reality. And I know exactly what the problem is, because I spent my time looking under rocks for money in many slumps in the oil patch. But is there ways that a company could expedite the process? You guys are public company or public accounting companies. Would it help if I brought a pro in to get my application in order? I mean, that's my experience with a lot of the smaller businesses that really need the help. Is they kind of have to. It's one thing to get the loan; it's another to have to learn the process to apply for the loan. Have you got any suggestions in that area? Either of you fellas?
I can jump in. Then if you want to jump in as well, just from your experience. But from my experience helping companies raise capital, 100%. I mean, you can do it internally if you got a great, controller or someone with a financial background. But the idea around applying for a loan as it sits today is, what did you look like pre-COVID? Let's call it that. And that's how institutions are looking at your ability to repay credit. And one of the things, and I know this is really basic, but the idea of safety and soundness of a loan, that's how credit adjudicators look at financing. So what I mean by that is, the safetiness piece is the asset-backed piece. What kind of assets do you have? Do we like them? Can we secure them? Can we provide financing against them? What kind of tangible assets are available? There are intangible assets as well, and those are very important, and we should be highlighting those. And then they look at the soundness of the loan. So the cash flows, the risk of those cash flows, the diversity of those cash flows. Can you pay back the loan, for example, over 5, 10, whatever years it is? Can you pay that back? And what are the assets to secure that loan? And so those are the focuses that the institutions will be focused on pre-COVID. What did this look like? And then there's the COVID story. So the idea of the COVID story is to say, what have you done to kind of protect your house, call it, so that you can weather the storm? And that's not saying that you have found enough money to get you through the storm, or liquidity, or whatever you want to call it. It's just to say that I've done this to get me here, and I have projected I need $2 million to get me through the next 12 months. And that's what a lot of institutions are looking at, is the next 12 months. How much money do you need to get through that? And scenario planning around that number to say, yes, this is what I think I need. So I think that those are the focuses that you really need to think about when you're going to your bank, BDC, EDC, to say, hey, I need money. Make sure you have a plan, because I can tell you that you want to be on the top of that pile of the 5,000 applicants, not on the bottom. And the ones with good plans will be on the top of that pile.
And that's exactly where I was going. Duncan, you've been borrowing money for years. Anything to add? You know the ropes.
Yeah, the only thing I'd want to add to what Ryan had already said, which I totally agree with, is that most companies will already have their credit facilities available, and so this is about a stretch. And if your bank isn't comfortable with that stretch, or your banking syndicate isn't comfortable with that stretch, this is where the EDC and the BDC money is going to come in terms of that. But the key in all of that, in terms of where the current lenders are at and where BDC and EDC can help, is that it's going to be subordinated to those senior lenders. And so long as you got it structured that way and you don't have to open up the credit agreement on a senior basis, which is what I think the BCAP programs are all about in terms of EDC and BDC, because you have to go through the financial institution first before getting to EDC and BDC. Basically, they have to say, we need help outside of your banking syndicate. So, for CWC, we've been in a fortunate position that our banking syndicate is well behind us and is willing to support our name. So we didn't have to look into the programs like the BCAP program ourselves at CWC. So.
Well, we seem to have some technical difficulties finding our oil company guy, but to move the program
Actually,
along.
I'm here.
Oh, Jeff. Yeah, we can. Yeah.
I've been here the whole time. I'm quite enjoying listening to this. This has been very peaceful for me to listen.
Well, party's over, buddy. I didn't see your picture on the screen. Well, that's it. You're on the hot seat. So I've got. Here we go. I'm. You're going to. Obviously, you've been in the E&P business all your life. You're the chairman of president, CEO, and the founder of Birchcliff Energy. You're the chairman of the board of CAP and the umbrella group for the producers. And I know CAP has been really active on the lobbying side. You've been to Ottawa on behalf of the whole sector. What did you see? What's the number one challenge? What are they telling you? And what do you think we can do?
Well, first of all, I apologize for playing around with my own communication devices. I have mastered a lot of things, but obviously not this. But I have been listening to the other speakers, and I very much agree with what they've had to say. I'd make a number of comments. Number one, liquidity is the biggest issue in the oil and gas sector, absolutely. And you've seen companies reporting where they have brackets around their cash flow, so they're losing hundreds of millions of dollars a quarter. And remember, Q1 was the good quarter. Q2 is going to be the poor quarter, and then out from there. So I think people need to realize that the results they're seeing are the good results, not the poor results. So liquidity is an issue. I think the Alberta government is standing watching what the federal government is going to do. I understand there's another package coming for not specifically the oil and gas industry, but all industries sometime this week. It's always just in a few hours. And so that may be helpful to some of the causes, but I would say a few things. I understand that there are at least 25 to 30 companies who have made applications to the EDC. And the issue with the E is an excellent EDC loan, as prior speakers said. That's really through your bank agent. It's good for a year. It can't be more than for $100 million. And it's based on reserve-based loans. So one of the issues I'm hearing is you have to qualify. When you do qualify for that, one of the big problems is you're subject to the climate policy of the Liberal government. The question is, what is that climate policy? And people are unclear on how that climate policy is going to work. So even if you get to the top of the pile and you're being heard by the EDC, the question of being able to complete that loan is causing some of these real small companies real problems.
But just if you pause for a second there, just so everybody really understands, what is the background of a reserve-based loan? Is basically a bank will forward so much secured debt based on the value of your oil and gas in the ground, and that just fell off the map. So the point is, I just want to make sure everybody understands. They do a quarterly review, then they're going to look around at the Q2 prices, and half your collateral or more is going to disappear. This is the challenge, isn't it?
Well, yeah, let's just get into that a little bit more. So if you have a reserve-based loan, it's based on the reserves of an oil and gas company. And really, when you're a bank, you focus in on what's called the proved developed producing reserves, called PDP. And so your proved developed producing reserves will dictate a value. If you And those are the types of reserves where you have to spend no more money, and they'll produce themselves out, and they'll produce for 3 years or 10 years or 20 years, and you do a net present value calculation on what that production is going to bring you. And then the banks will lend you. It used to be somewhere around 60% of your proved, developed, producing reserve value. And then the next level of reserves are your proven reserves, which means you can produce out your PDPs. And if you spend a little bit more money tying in some wells, drilling some development wells right around your proven wells, you can bring that production on for a small amount of money. It'll probably tie into your current infrastructure system. So a little bit of capital with very little risk gets your proven reserves. And then your probables are reserves that they're probably there and they have a big value, but the bank doesn't lend against those. So depending on who you are and how much the bank likes you, and if you're one of their names, they'll start with those PDPs and move up. So what's happened is they use, as you mentioned, quarterly pricing. So Q1, we had good solid prices, and everybody's PDP reserves were probably in pretty good shape. But when you get to the end of Q2, what we're seeing is, oil is going to be, call it, gone from 62 US in January to, I don't know what number you're going to use, as in $20 and at the end of Q2. So you've lost 42 US. Probably you've lost on what's called the differential between West Texas and Edmonton Light. There's a term called differential, which is the difference between West Texas and Edmonton Light, and that was as high as $17 or $18 in the month of March and early in April, so U.S. So a lot of companies were, in fact, only making a couple of dollars on their barrels of oil, but you get your loan is based on PDP reserves.
Well, I guess the reason wanted the detail on this is people see in the paper that the industry needs 10 billion or 20 billion or 30 billion, or the premier says, where's the money? So the point is now you understand why, because there's this massive evaporation of collateral backstocking these loans. So just to go, the EDC program, the idea is that the EDC, at least the press release said, that they would come in and they would guarantee the part of the loan that just disappeared. I talked to some senior lenders in Toronto last week. They were quite pleased with the program, but what you're explaining is it's not. It was up to 100 billion. I heard that was going to go up, but you're saying it's more complicated than that. I mean, it's not actually there. Are they, like the other two programs, working on the details? What's your view?
I think it's a lot more complicated, and the reason is this. Sounds great, and one of the other speakers, I think it was Brian, said it's good for $75 to $100 million, but there's three problems here. Number one, most of these companies, not most of them, some companies are carrying a fair bit of debt to start with. When commodity prices start to really fall away, there's no guarantee the price of oil is going to go back to $40 or $50 within the next couple of years. So you're going to start to lend to companies that, boy, you better have these commodity prices go back up, or you're just throwing more money, bad money after good money, and that's what these lenders are concerned about. So the companies have three problems. Their current cash flows disappeared for Q2, but the question is, will it come back in Q3 and will it come back in Q4? People expect it will, but there's risk associated with that. So if you think you're just going to walk in and the EDC is going to give you money, that's not how that's going to play out.
Holy cow. Yeah.
The BDC problem is this. It's a mezzanine financing. And that means you're coming in behind the bank. But a lot of companies already have mezzanine financing, meaning term debt or long-term debt with bonds or with private insurance companies or that type of thing. So you have your bank lines, then you have other forms of financing. So Now BDC is going to have to come in, and there's going to be a discussion as to, well, where in the pecking order is their money going to fit in here, and how's that going to sit with the other lenders? So it's just not as easy as thinking you're going to show up, shake someone's hand you've never met before, and walk out with $60 million worth of money all in a week. Forget it.
Well, we agreed on the other two programs that was unlikely to happen. One of the things we were going to do here today, and thanks, Jeff, that is it's a sobering, if not upbeat, assessment of the reality of the situation. Of course, that's why we're here today. Extraordinary times. One of the things we were going to do was engage the participants, and one of the questions we had was of the several hundred people that were going to log in here today, and our question is, take it away. Well, I guess I better ask it. There we are. Here we have, without government financial support, your company, what are the chances without financial resources to stay if they don't approve before October? Is your company going to make it or not? Do you think either the company you're working at or the company that let you go, what does it look? Without financial support, what is the pulse of the people on the program today, whether their company was going to survive or not? And I'm going to fill this in myself because luckily I have one employee, me, and we're going to be okay. Anyway, we'll get that answer coming up in a minute. So okay. So we've understand I think the reality is that there's nothing particularly encouraging. I guess Duncan's the most upbeat one, and Ryan. I mean, Ryan, you've heard this you've got E&P company clients as well. Is there things that we could do as a group, or is there things the government could do to accelerate this? I guess that was one of the questions I asked earlier of you, Jeff, because you'd been to Ottawa on behalf of CAP, and Duncan, you've lobbied before. Do you think they get it, Ryan, or is there too much happening too quickly?
I would say that I want to be encouraging that they get it, and the problems that are occurring. But what I would say is Deloitte, generally speaking, has been a big advocate of our clients and saying where they're missing gaps in financing and funding and taxes, and where are the layoffs happening and things like that. Being an advocate again for our clients. But I go back to that speed piece, that we do need to act with some pace and get financing and funding into these companies. But we also need to think about that. We want to try and align incentives and do all that great stuff. But again, back to the pace thing, should we be just providing financing into this organization and looking to do something else? And I'll give an example of that is that when, for example, with the BDC, which I was referring to earlier, one of the pieces they came out with in the BCAP program was that they didn't want to have a standstill agreement in place when they were going to go in behind the first lender or the senior bank. And that's a very traditional thing. When you have a senior lender and a mezzanine lender or someone in second position, you often have a standstill agreement in place, a subordination and standstill agreement. And the idea of a standstill agreement is that if you're offside on your covenants on the first lender, they can ask the mezzanine person or company or whoever it is, the funder, to not stop taking payments, at least stop taking principal payments, and that's a part of the agreement. But they often like that. So I said to BDC, you realize that a lot of banks don't like that. Like if you don't want to have a standstill agreement in place, but the bank wants a standstill agreement in place, those are some pretty specific things that the bank won't like. And I really hope that you guys work this out between the institutions, and that there's going to be no headaches between that, because I've done mezzanine financing, I've been a banker. They won't like that. And so those specific things that, it's great to announce programs, but we need to have details so that we can get the money into the hands that need it.
Just to go back, further background, Duncan. I mean, things you've summed it up pretty well. Things look tough for the service sector. There's a bit of activity coming, but mature asset programs are helpful. But I mean, in the end, in past slumps, the government of Alberta used things like royalty holidays or something. In the States in 2008, they had the TARP, the troubled asset programs, and to actually put equity into these companies. I mean, what do you think they could do other than commodity prices to get some investment or get some interest in putting capital back into this business?
Yeah, so I'll just take a stab at that. with regards to the federal government, I think that our biggest ally here in terms of actually helping the energy sector has been the big six banks. I think that they've had a private conversation there to say, look, you're going to have to step up for this energy sector and make sure that we don't have just no industry coming out at the end of this thing, because it's going to have a ripple effect throughout all of Canada, and all Canadians are going to be on the hook for it if you don't help this out. So I think that that's the part I see that has been the biggest shift in terms of the federal government's understanding as to how important the Canadian energy sector is to the overall economy of Canada, and in terms of their loan books. So, while Jeff was right in terms of we believe something is coming, and it is rather complex in terms of how to help. I think we just got to sit and wait, hurry up and wait in terms of seeing what that is. But the number has to be a big number. Like when the first tranche of the $1 billion came out with the federal government on the site rehab program for helping our sector and the services side, I think the comments back was great start, but the number has to be much bigger. And what that number is, lots of numbers have been thrown around, but it's certainly in the high multiples of what has already been given in terms of the energy sector. So, Jeff, I don't know if you have any further comments on that.
You're the man, Jeff. What do you help us there? Jeff? Well, then I'll ask. Apparently, Jeff is.
No, I'm here.
Sorry. Well, yeah. If you could just jump in here. I mean, there's two elements of this that surprised me when I researched this subject, and you and I spoke. The Bank of Canada has done a couple of remarkable things. One is they've stepped into the provincial government debt markets for the first time. They started out with a modest program and then increased it tremendously because they said they'd take 60% or something of provincial bonds, and then discovered that nobody would buy the other 60, so they stepped it up to 100. This would give the provinces more liquidity should they be so inclined. The second thing they did is they decided to go into the commercial paper market. Now, they started out at BBB, which is a pretty high rating for a lot of the companies in this sector. But with the combination of what Duncan said, with the pressure from the banks, with all the liquidity, the assistance coming from the Bank of Canada, and obviously the ongoing discussions between CAP and Ottawa, what do you, again, you alluded there was more coming. What could it be, or what should it be, I guess, Jeff, if you could wrap this up for us?
Well, it's just what the other two said. The energy sector needs a lot of money, but I want to break it into kind of three parts.
Great.
First of all, the energy, your first question was, do the governments get it? And from a CAP perspective, so the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, as well as EPAC, the Small Explorers Association, I know that the provincial government, Sonia Savage and Jason Kenney, have a weekly call with members of both associations, which I chair one association, and we're speaking directly to them each week. So we know all of the issues. They're well aware of the issues that the small and big companies have. Federally, we had that for the first 4 weeks, and now Minister O'Regan has not taken our calls for the last couple of weeks, so we're somewhat nervous about that. But I think they very much understand how important the energy industry is, and the question of the banks leaning on the federal government to give them money to support the energy industry. Remember, the banks will lose a lot of money if all of their loans turn bad. The second question you asked, will these companies make it? Well, Birchcliff will make it. We have $1 billion facility. We have lots of credit available to us, so we don't have the issue. But I want to get back to short-term and long-term money. In the short term, the Alberta government stepped up, remember, and immediately paid everybody's AER fees, and then waived a number of fees, taxes, filing, everything associated with what would cost you cash today in order to help companies preserve their cash. The royalties break doesn't work because nobody's paying any royalties because commodity prices are so low. So that doesn't do it. Federally, they have not put their pens down, and here's where the real rub, I think, comes from. And whether we like it or not, the federal government stood up and said, energy is very important to us. The supply chains are very important to Canada, especially all the truckers and all the farmers who are working very hard, notwithstanding COVID is rampant around us. And then they put the carbon tax in place on April 1, which specifically costs truckers and farmers more money. So it's really hard to understand which side of the equation the current federal government is standing on. So we need them to put their pens down, what we call no further harm, and let the energy industry kind of stand up and get its feet underneath it, which means reducing our costs to make us more instantly competitive. Carbon taxes are a good place to start, but providing enough bridge financing to get everybody on the other side so they can meet their short-term cash requirements, and then ensuring that the banks don't trigger the future loans, because what's about to happen here is a number of companies are going to trip their financial covenants in Q2, Q3, Q4. So trailing financial covenants are going to be a real issue in the energy industry, and that's what's making everyone so uncomfortable. Is it's not what happened in Q1 with COVID. It's what's about to happen, because under the loan agreements, you have trailing cash flow covenants where you need so much cash flow, or you trip a financial covenant, which puts your loans into jeopardy. And that's why everybody's so nervous. So we need the big banks, we need the federal government to tell the big banks to relax those covenants, and then everyone will start to breathe easier, because they can take the cash they do have and survive. And commodity prices are already strengthening. I don't know if the other speakers have that same view.
Go ahead, guys.
I can just quickly jump in. And this is something that we've seen more and more of, just hearing what the government is looking at. And this is more broadly speaking, is that one of the pieces is that they don't want to fund zombie companies either. And that's what I've heard from my conversations, not necessarily in the public, but in the back room, is that we do not want to continue to finance companies that maybe shouldn't have been financed in the past. And then there's the moral hazard, I guess, of a company like Duncan's, where it's done very well, it's seemingly surviving through this. Should we be financing, for example, Duncan's competitor to get them through this as well? There's arguments, I think, on both sides of that coin. And I think the Canadian government is taking a certain stance in that as well, compared to maybe other governments. So I've seen that or heard that conversation as well, around what are we doing here and how are we trying to go forward.
Well, I don't think there's any question we can't save everybody. I see Melissa's come back, and we walked through 45 minutes in a heartbeat. Melissa, take it.
Yeah, and I think a few more as well. I just wanted to revisit that poll really quickly before we're out of time here. So we asked, without government financial support of some kind, does your company have the financial resources to stay in business if oil prices and the economy do not improve before October? 45% of you said yes, 23% said no, and another 33% said I don't know. So we're seeing quite a bit of uncertainty and a bit all over the map on that question there. Just to finish this out here, I know we're getting close to the hour. I just wanted to thank you, David, and thank you all of our presenters here for this important discussion today. And I'm sure I can speak on behalf of our viewers, and there's still lots of questions that had come through. And if you do have any other questions for our presenters, please reach out to our team here at Global Energy Show, and we'll do our best to help connect you and help circle back with you on those questions and get those answered for you. Now, just really quickly, I want to give you a quick update on what's coming up in our Global Energy Show online series, happening weekly on Wednesdays at this time at 3 p.m. Mountain. Next week on May 13th, We'll begin our technical webinar series with a session from the SRC on polymer flood design. Then we're back on May 20th with our strategic series for a conversation called Economy in Crisis, Why Canada Needs to Back Its Energy Industry Now. And on May 27th, we're joined by Proton Technologies to hear about the exciting potential for hydrogen production from oil reservoirs. So to view our upcoming schedule and to register for these upcoming webinars, you can visit globalenergyshow.com/webinars. And thanks again to our presenters, our sponsors, energynow.com and Empowering Pumps and Equipment. And thank you all for joining us today. Stay safe.
Have a great day.